I'm Janet.
And I'm Roger.
Welcome to the sixth season of the Halfling and Spaceman Journeys into Active Fandom. There are so many fabulous creators out there, and they all have their own stories about their journeys to becoming the creators that they are now.
We're here to bring you those stories and hopefully entertain and inspire you. And today we are excited to be talking with Alma Alexander. A native of Yugoslavia, she's a fantasy author who has also published book reviews, travelogues, essays, and poetries. Welcome, Alma.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for taking the time to join us. Let's go ahead and get started. Just tell us about yourself. And I just found sort of your background that I was reading about just fantastic because you have been a world traveler essentially. You've seen a lot of the world. So tell us about yourself.
I am from age 10 or so when my father decided to take on a job with the World Bank and then a subsequent to that with the United Nations. And I've been a professional tumbleweed ever since. Basically, he's been doing this, that, and the other thing, and the rest of the family kind of trotted after him. I was 10 years old when we landed in Zambia, which is kind of mid Africa, which we knew nothing about. We came from old Europe and we landed in the middle of magic and mystery, really. And for me, an entirely new language, which is what I'm talking to you in now, because I didn't speak English before that. And that is to say, I kind of did. I did the Mary Had a Little Lamb type of level English, but I didn't know anything other than that. And I got picked up by the scruff of my little neck and I got put down into a playground full of English speaking children. And I made every mistake that I made precisely once and never again because you get teased to tears about it. And if you only seen words written down when you pronounce them and you don't know how to say them, and you say them wrong, and everyone goes, she said it weird, then you kind of never do it again the same way. So that's how I learned my English, really. I got picked up and thrown into the deep end and osmosed it. And subsequently, jumping forward a little bit in time, many years later, I was asked by somebody at the University of Auckland in New Zealand whether I would take part in a study that this person was doing, comparing native speakers of English to speakers of English as a second language. And he gave me a bunch of test questions. And then he called me up on the phone and yelled at me and said, I can't use you. You scored 98% better than the native English speakers did.
Well, okay.
Now, that,
But after that crash course in English, I kind of started writing, dreaming, thinking in English, which is my primary writing language. And I came in, learned English at 10. I wrote my first novel length work in English when I was 11. It was terrible and it doesn't survive. I wrote my first good novel when I was 14 in pencil in 3 hardcover notebooks. I still have that. It's remarkably free of crossings out and rubbings out. It's actually still quite good. The bones of it hold together. One of these days I'll go back to it and fix it. But after that, I just kept on doing it. And there's a sidetrack in my life when I got to the point of, okay, I'm done with school. What do I do now? And university was the obvious thing, but I didn't want to do things like English because I couldn't see myself doing anything with a degree in English other than teaching a different generation of kids every year about the same Shakespeare play they didn't want to know about, which is not something that I could see myself doing for the rest of my life. So I picked science, and I actually trundled along and got a master's degree in molecular biology in the end. And I tried doing a PhD, discovered that to do that, you need to eat, breathe, and live the PhD, the subject matter. I just didn't have that in me. So I gave up on the PhD. And in any event, when I was doing my master's, I was sitting in the corner of the lab writing a fantasy novel. So, which my supervisor knew about and just winked at. as it turns out, this is kind of really quite strange because when I circled round to writing my Chronicles, which is 3 novels about based on how it is essentially extremely possible in genetics, in molecular genetics terms, for weird creatures to exist. And I wrote a novel based on that. So I kind of circled back and used my scientific background for that. And I got my old professor to write a foreword for me. And he said that science is as good as it gets. So
You can't get a bigger compliment than that.
no, he's a nice man. He likes me.
Now, Alma, were you considered to be a geek growing up, or was that something being an immigrant from Yugoslavia, something that you really weren't familiar with, the geek culture and all that?
How about diving headfirst into Dungeons and Dragons?
Alma wins. Alma wins the podcast.
I was LARPing and doing Dungeons and Dragons and all kinds of weird crap like that from the get go. I I started I started reading fantastic stuff when I was very young because I started out with all the fairy tales. And you must remember this. I come from Eastern Europe. We don't have the namby-pamby Disney versions. We have the Cinderella where people cut off heels and toes to get into glass slippers.
Yeah.
You kind of grow with a literally a grim fairy tale. That's what I grew up with. When I was 6 years old, I was reading Little Mermaid and crying over that. And I don't mean the lobster and Under the Sea. I mean the
Right.
actual original real Little Mermaid
Right.
kind of. I learned my basic moral compass from those fairy tales, my empathy, the way that I look into the world and see people. I built up with those building blocks. And then I just kept on reading fantasy. I mean, I just got into things like Narnia when I learned English, which was the obvious kind of thing. Then I read The Lord of the Rings before I read The Hobbit. Um, and I actually went into university. I joined the Tolkien Appreciation Society, and I knew more about Tolkien and his work than the people in the society did. And I kept on asking about it. And then there was this one woman who was at a meeting and said plaintively that she wanted to start reading Tolkien from the beginning. So she started with Silmarillion because that was the beginning of it. And I was going, you don't start with that. You don't even go near that. But anyway, so that was that was kind of the backbone of everything. Tolkien taught me a lot of things. Tolkien taught me about what could happen, what could be done with fantasy. The reason that I write as lush as I do is probably because I cut my teeth on Tolkien when I was preteen, and it just kind of grew in me that way. That's the way language lives.
That's pretty remarkable.
That is remarkable.
That's and excellent. I really appreciate
like
that.
I said, Alma wins the podcast.
Yes, absolutely.
Of Lord of the Rings books. One is a paperback with a broken spine, which I have read and reread and know off by heart. And if you ask me for a specific scene, I could find it for you within a space of a couple of pages. One I have, which is a very lovely collector's edition with illustrations by Alan Lee, and it's kind of there to grace my bookshelf and nothing else. And the third copy I got because I was terrified that my little broken spine paperback is going to fall apart any minute now. And I wanted a copy of the book that I can go and have a backup to go to. So I've got 3 copies of the damn book sitting on my shelf, and it's not a little book.
Alma, did you see the Lord of the Rings movies when they came out? They did my man Tom Bombadil wrong.
I don't care about. I realize that you can't do exactly verbatim. I didn't care about Tom Bombadil. I cared what they did to Aragorn. I cared what they did to Faramir. I cared what they did to Gimli. I cared about the things that he changed simply because he wanted to change things and for no other reason. When I went to see the first movie, my husband was sitting next to me and he said to me after the first 10 minutes, "Stop growling."
Well, I suspect that you're probably not alone in that. I mean, I know that the movies had, their rabid fans, but I think the diehard Tolkien's, you know, they're of a different breed. I'll say
Put
that.
it this way, the movies are very pretty, but part of that was New Zealand's fault and not Peter Jackson's. I mean, basically, you can film something in New Zealand, anything in New Zealand, and New Zealand is going to be lovely because it just is. I lived there for 6 years. I know. I've been everywhere in New Zealand, and
Well,
it's just gorgeous. And you can't not love it because it's beautiful.
well,
But
halfling, we need to go to New Zealand so maybe our audio equipment will work right every time. The
Uh,
natural beauty of New Zealand causes everything to
well,
work.
that's on the bucket list.
That is
I
on the
mean,
bucket
we
list,
need to
not to
do
move
that
there, but to visit.
for sure.
there's a volcano on the North Island, which is really kind of quite reasonably close to Auckland, which is a major ski area, and it's the only place in the world where you can go skiing. And your warning posters on the ski area warn you what to do in the case of not of an avalanche but of a lahar.
Wow. Uh, ugh. So I want to ask you a question. If because you went into molecular biology, but at what point did you decide to try your hand at writing? I mean, you said that you crafted your first quote good novel at the age of 14. So did you really have that starting point that, you decided that's what you really wanted to do, or how
Oh,
did your serious writing become,
I started writing when I was 5. I wrote my first poem, which my father had till the end of his days when I was 5 years old, and it was on the subject of a broken alarm clock, and don't ask me why. Just one of those things that caught my little childish eye. So I wrote a poem about it. I mean, I wrote for. Let me tell you a story about one of the pivotal moments in my life. There are very few people in the writing world whom I will say that I venerate, and one of those people was Roger Zelazny.
Mhm.
And we had when I was in New Zealand, and I literally, yes, I was a geek, I was a nerd, but I had no real idea what science fiction conventions were until I found a little flyer in New Zealand saying that there was going to be a convention on Easter weekend of that year, and it was going to be in Auckland. And the guests of honor were 2 people. One of them was Vonda McIntyre, of whom I hadn't even heard at that point. I didn't know her at all. But the other one was Roger Zelazny, and my eyes stood out in stalks. And I
Wow.
kind of went, okay, I have to go to this. And then I discovered something even worse, and that is that they were advertising a writing workshop, and you were to send your material in, and 5, count them, 5 people were going to be picked for this writing workshop, which was going to be presided over by Rhonda McIntyre and Roger Zelazny. So I picked up a story and I flew in and I sent it in, and I spent the rest of those next 6 months going, I sent in that story. Roger Zelazny is going to read that story. He's going to think I'm a complete idiot. What have I done? I got picked for this workshop. And so there's 5 of us, little dweebs, wet behind the ears writers, sitting there, and the idea was that we would kind of weigh in on each other's work, and then the 2 pros would weigh in with their opinions. So we did all this, and when my turn came, and Vonda McIntyre hands me back my story, and it's annotated to an inch of its life. There's little pencil notes on the sides, in the margins, in between the lines, on top of things, underneath things, everywhere. And I'm just going, oh my God, it's going to take me a year to go through this thing.
Oh dear.
Roger Zelazny, who's sitting next to me, and you must realize that I'm sitting next to Roger Zelazny, so I'm shaking anyway. And there's nothing in front of him. Nothing. Not a piece of paper and not a scrap of anything. He just turns around and he looks at me, and he had this gray eyes, the color of Damascus steel. He just looked at me and he said, I've got 2 questions for you. He said, how long have you been writing? And I kind of went, since I was yay high. And before that, I told lies. I mean, before I could write, I just told stories. And he said, okay. And do you read and or write poetry? And I had to say yes to that because my grandfather weaned me on his sonnets. So I grew up in poetry in my veins. And Roger Zelazny looked at me out of those gray eyes and he said to me, "It shows you have a voice all of your own. No one else is ever going to write this way." Let me just say that this was Easter of that year. By June of that year, he was dead.
Mm,
My window. That
wow.
was my ultimate only window. And that's what he said to me. And even to this day, this was many years ago now, but if I ever get discouraged or down or completely depressed about things, I get a little voice in the back of my head saying, no one else is ever going to write this way.
That is a beautiful story.
It is, and that is something that you should cherish, and I'm sure you do cherish, with all your heart, um, because that's just
It was a privilege.
yeah,
It was a definite
abs
privilege.
Yeah, Roger Zelazny is one of my favorite writers. The
yeah.
Chronicles of Amber is probably my
Yep.
favorite
Mhm.
fantasy series.
I actually took a copy of my Nine Princes in Amber, which was a dinky little paperback that I've had for years, and I took it for him to sign that time. And he looked at that, and he just looked at it and said, "Where'd you get that? It's been out of print for years."
Uh, so so I guess we can say that writing is something you really kinda always wanted to do. Um, yeah.
It's not a question of wanting to do. It's not a question of something that I planned on. It's who I am. It's just in my genes. I've always, when I was growing up, I had a first cousin who was the daughter of my mom's sister, and we kind of grew up in each other's back pockets. And when we were growing up and playing together, she was always running around pretending to be a vet and healing animals, and that's exactly what she became. Me, I was a writer. I was writing stories. I was writing things. I was telling stories. I was reading books. We both became what we said we were from the cradle.
Mhm. Uh, that's cool. That's really cool.
You know what we used to do when we were kids? We used to, and this was mostly me making things up. I mean, remember, there's just two of us. So we used to reenact the Three Musketeers, like two little girls, and we just split the roles between us. She was this musketeer, and I was that one. She was this, and I was that. And I happened to be Richelieu because I like villains. But we would run around wearing my mother's satin dressing gown and having sword fights with wooden cooking spoons and generally having a wonderful time about it.
Uh, oh, that sounds like fun. Um, well, that just kinda reminds me, are you familiar with the Nancy Drew, young adult series, the Girl Detective? Have you ever heard of them?
I mean,
Carol O'Keen?
let me put it this way, I know of it, but I don't think I read any of it or much of it. Mysteries
Okay.
were never my jam, really. So
Well, the reason I brought that up is because, you were talking about, what you were doing when you were a kid, and I can remember my best friend and I, she lived just down the road from us. We ate, slept Nancy Drew, and we used to act out Nancy Drew mysteries. So we would be the different characters in those books. So and you know, I always say that if you play Let's Pretend when you're a kid, it's a shame if you grow up. But we play role playing games, so we never really did grow up. We just
look, we know what they say, growing older is mandatory, growing up is optional.
absolutely.
And that's our philosophy intact.
Uh,
So, Alma, your first published novel, how long did it take it? How long did it take you to write your first published novel?
That's the one I was writing underneath my notes in my lab in my microbiology era. So it just took a while because I was writing snippets of it every time I sat down to wait for an experiment to cook. Um, but the thing about that book, of course, is that that one started with a scene, and it took me 2/3 of the damn book to get back to that scene when I started writing the book. So I wrote it like a lot of my work. I tend to jigsaw piece things, and I don't necessarily write in a linear fashion. I tend to, write something that happens to be living rent free in my head in that particular point in time, and then I'll try and connect these little bits with bridges that I kind of craft to make sure that there's a road that you need to take to get from here to there. But I very rarely write linearly in the sense of, I sit down and I start at the beginning and then I go on until I write the end. I just don't work that way. When people tell, when people say that, they sit down and they outline each book to the point of to the scene level. They'll outline each book scene by scene by scene. And if I try to do that, my hindbrain says you've already written this book and I'm not interested in writing it anymore. What I need to do is I need to find out, I need to be surprised, I need to be enchanted just as much as the reader might be. I need not to know what happens next until it happens.
That's a good approach.
It is.
I like that.
Somebody referred to that as discovery writing.
Yeah.
It's not exactly pantsing, and it's certainly not plotting. It's discovery writing.
Right.
3/4 of the time, I tend to talk to my characters a lot, and a lot of the time, I'm sitting there going, "You did what? You said what? You expect me to get you out of? Or you're going to get out of that? Never mind. Okay, just keep going. I'll just keep writing. You dictate. I'll keep writing."
It's my turn?
It's still on you.
It's still my turn? Oh, go.
It's still on you, dear.
Okay, well, then I'll find another question to ask. Alma, according to your bio, you have shone the light of science into the shadowy world of shapeshifters in the Were Chronicles. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that is a bold statement.
Well, yeah, and it's like this is where the science is as good as it gets thing comes into it, because I don't know how much anybody out there will know about how genetics works, but there is a massive amount of DNA in every cell of your body. If you stretched it all out, there's 2 miles of DNA in every cell of your body, and it isn't a linear thing, much like my writing. It isn't a linear thing. Basically, you have a beginning that tells you, okay, here's where you start reading this thing. And then there's a code that says, okay, now you read from this beginning, you're going to read this bit of the genome, and then you're going to jump and you're going to read that bit of the genome, and you're going to read that bit of the genome, and that connects together to form whatever is necessary for that thing to be expressed. In between, there's a lot of other DNA that isn't getting read as the thing that is being produced is being produced. And the operons that are governing what is being read are basically saying to the genome, okay, we want to make protein A, and this is the parts of the DNA in your cell that we need to go to put this thing together. But there's a lot of other stuff in there that's in between. What happens, this is where the weird stuff comes in. There's a different operon which you start reading from it, and the operon says, okay, this is what happens when the moon is full, and now we're not reading this bit of the DNA, we're reading this bit of the DNA, and everything changes.
Ooh, lunar psychoepigenetics.
And it actually could work because there's so much junk DNA in your DNA that you can put together anything you want. You can basically if you look at pictures of early embryos of various mammals, you really cannot tell apart an early embryo of a whale, of a dog, of a human being. They look very much alike.
Didn't James Blish cover that idea in A Case for Conscience?
Don't know that one.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I might be misremembering. So, over to you, Halfling.
I'm just thinking about that idea. That's really cool. I mean,
that would explain my brother, the Wolfman.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, there's a reason he's the Wolfman. Those eyebrow ridges and that big fluffy beard.
I know. He's got the hair for sure.
Ow.
Well, has your knowledge of molecular biology found its way into other books that you've written besides the Ware Chronicles?
Not directly, and that was much to my mother's disgust because she was my parents were kind of more traditional in their world. You went to university, you studied something, and then you found a job in that field. You worked at it until you dropped dead or retired, whichever came first, and then that was your life. And I basically went to university, studied something, and then went off and did something else entirely. And my mother never quite forgave me for that. It was like the first time I handed her one of my early books that was published in hardcover, and I handed my sainted mother my first published hardcover, and she looked at it and turned it over in her hands and said, "It looks just like a real book."
Oh. Oh.
Wow. Okay.
Hey, as long as it comes with a real paycheck.
Well, that one did. That was what I call my blessed book. That was what paid for half of my house.
Uh, nothing like getting a real paycheck that says it's a real job.
That's right. That's right.
Uh, the spaceman, I think you got the next
Are you
question.
sure? Are you sure? We've already talked about pantsing versus planning.
Well, that's true. That's true. You did kind of discuss your method
Their
for
writing style.
your
Yeah.
writing style.
So, discovery.
Which I will have to say, every writer is different.
A little bit different, at
and
least.
every writer has their own process. So there, I don't think there's ever really a right or wrong to it. You just have to find what works for you.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And if somebody were to try to force your hand to write a certain way, you just couldn't do it. You just wouldn't be productive. Your mind wouldn't be there. Um, so, and that's
It comes right down to the basics. Like there are some people who like things like Scrivener because it gives them the structure that they crave to build something on. I use Microsoft Word because I just open a blank document and I put my fingers to the keyboard and I write. Whatever comes on top of the page is what turns up. I don't have any kind of pre-planning going on. There are people who still swear by typewriters.
We know a few of them. Yeah, we are the most writer knowing non-writers you'll ever meet.
that's one of the benefits that we've gained from doing this show is the number of incredible writers that we have been able to talk to and find out about their journeys. It's
One of the joys of being one, but being in that kind of tribe is the number of people you meet who have been mainstays of your life up until then, and you suddenly get to meet the person with a name that's tattooed on their forehead, and you kind of go, "Oh, you're real."
Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. So
I was actually at one point I was doing bits and pieces for I forget even what it was some magazine. This was also back in New Zealand at some point, and I was given the opportunity of interviewing Terry Pratchett when he came to visit New Zealand at one point.
wow.
And when the first way I met Terry Pratchett is that I was waiting in a bookshop where he was supposed to be doing a signing, and there was a crowd of people waiting for him to turn up. And he was walked in from the back of the shop wearing this signature black hat of his, and he's not a big man; he's kind of short. And he walks in and he kind of smiles at everyone, and he sits down, and that entire crowd just descended on him like a fish out of a school of piranhas. And basically, when he just came up for breath and he looked at me, and the really funny thing about Terry Pratchett is the man with 3 R's in his name couldn't say the letter R. And he looked at me and he said, in a friendly manner, "That was a bit of a feeding frenzy, wasn't it?"
Oh,
Uh,
another one of my heroes.
I
yeah.
met Terry Pratchett, and he was a wonderful human being, and he is greatly missed in this world.
Oh, yes, absolutely, absolutely. He is one of our absolute favorites. We we don't get the opportunity to actually read all that much anymore. I'm hoping that's going to change now that I'm about to retire. So I'll probably get some more reading done, especially since I'm going to start my own YouTube book review channel coming up. But we listened to all of the Discworld series on audio. Um, and it was fantastic because the readers were Nigel Planer
And Stephen Briggs.
and Stephen Briggs, and
Both of them are awesome.
they did fantastic, readings of his books, and it was just it. I think it really lent something to the stories. Not that you couldn't read the books and just be captivated, but to hear their telling, reading of these stories, that brought something to it. But we really enjoyed it. I actually cried when he read the last book.
Yeah, people who can read. I went to a reading that Guy Gabriel Kay did in one convention somewhere, and he can really read his stuff. He just had that entire audience sitting there, kind of with their jaws hanging open and just lapping it up. He really can do this. He can calculate.
Yeah.
So, Alma, what has been your biggest surprise in writing so far?
The fact that I can't really exist without doing it. It's a part of my visceral makeup. And a couple of times in my life, in the face of unbearable tragedies, the voices in my head shut up. And I lived through a period of silence that eventually came down to the voices whispering in the back of my brain, "Write or we all die."
Mm.
It's just something that I need to do. It's in the last couple of years, I've had a bunch of bad losses, and I haven't really written that much of any kind of fiction simply because I couldn't get it together inside my head to do it. And I got to the point of write or we all die, and I just basically finished up something which landed in this awkward novella length, which is really horrible because it's like neither fish nor fowl. It's not a short story, it's not a novel. I'm trying to figure out what to do with it, but eventually I'm going to probably put it out as a sort of a short ebook or something like that. But I gave it to someone to beta read, a writer friend of mine, and she said, "You're back." So I can start I can start living the life I was meant to lead again.
That is excellent. That is most excellent.
We had a writer on the show a while back, and he had he had been writing for a while, and then after he got married, he kind of put it aside because life happened, and he had to get a quote real job because they had real bills coming in, and and life just sort of hit him, and he stopped writing, and it actually was making him miserable to not write. And, he was doing the best he could, but his wife finally just said, "Write,"
Mm.
so essentially just said, you need to do this. Just go ahead and, do what you need to do. Get it out, write it. And so he started writing
Do the
again.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so he
Well,
started.
when I was being wooed, my husband to be said, "You write." I'll do everything else. How do you not love that?
Sounds pretty darn lovable to me.
That's a deal right there. I'm telling you.
So, Janet, that means you're going to be the talent and I'm going to be the producer. And yeah, I don't have to be on camera anymore.
You're going to be my lovely assistant.
Oh, that's right. I got to preen my beard a little bit.
But if he is, you have to make him wear the proper costume. Have you got the proper spangles?
Ooh, I would look good in spangles.
Hmm.
I would look good in spangles.
Sure.
Sequins. I'm just saying that the spaceman can rock it, whatever it is.
You could put sparkles in your beard.
I could. Yeah. Don't tempt me.
Glitter the beard.
Don't tempt me. Don't tempt me. I'll do it.
Yeah, if you're the spaceman, I'll want to introduce you to somebody.
Uh-oh.
You recognize him?
I see a purple dragon.
He's a purple dinosaur.
Oh.
He's the plush that went to space.
Ah.
And I saw pictures or video of this thing floating inside a capsule somewhere. And I said, well, I want one.
I remember that. That.
Time I looked around for him, he was sold out everywhere. I turned the internet upside down before I could find my little dinosaur. So I've got him sitting here now.
Space Dino. Spaceman approves.
I remember that, Alma. Yes.
So, Hedrick, you are going to have to go to space now.
No. I think he's a land animal.
No. Yeah. Hedrick is an adventurer. He can handle land. He can fight pirates. I'm just saying.
Okay. Anyway, back to what we're all here for.
That's right. We're here to talk to Alma and get to know Alma, not to get to know Hedrick.
Correct.
Although I've got rooms full of plushes, so that's okay.
Well, one of the things that we want to do is inspire our audience and people out there who may be thinking about, their own careers and their own path to their creativity. But what's the best piece of advice you've ever actually gotten from somebody?
Don't trust anything that begins with always and never.
I like that.
Yeah.
Because it's something that always works for that person. It may or may not work for you. Something that never works for that other person might be the thing that you swear by.
Right.
It's not
right.
It's not a zero-sum game. And the big words like always and never don't apply to everybody in the same measure. And you have to find your own levels of always and never.
That is so true. That goes back to what we were just talking about with the writing method, your own process for writing. You have to find what works for you. And you can't, it can't be one of those, well, this is the way you need to do it. Well, it may not be the way you need to do it. Yeah.
The other thing that I would say to people is, and it's a two-pronged thing, and it's on the one end of it, don't fall in love with your own writing to the point that you can't listen to whatever anybody else says to you about it. If you say, well, this is the way I've written it and nobody else can touch it, it probably needs touching. I mean, if you take a look at some of the author-approved versions of published books, you realize that the work that the editors did was golden. And the flip side of that is that you can't edit your own work. You can't, because the things that you see in there are the things that were in your head, and they may or may not be on the written page because you're just reading between the lines and you know what you meant to say, and that's exactly what you see. you need an extra pair of eyes, and a good editor is really essential, and they're worth their weight in gold. And you pay one as much as you can afford to get their input into what you have. You might have created pure gold, but they will create the thing that is made from that gold. You can't do that yourself. You have to have a cold pair of eyes looking at something like that.
Yep, every diamond needs a jeweler to polish and cut it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that leads me to a related question though about writers groups, specifically. Have you been have you ever participated in writers groups?
On and off, here and there. They can range from the good to the bad to the ugly. The thing about writers groups is that if you're in the wrong level of writers group, it can cripple you. If you are in a place that is above your waterline, you'll drown in it, and you won't. You need to be with the people who are more or less at your own level to be in a good writing group. Because if you are the low person on the totem pole, everyone else is higher up than you, more published than you. I'm not going to say better than you because that is purely subjective. But the point is, they've all done more than you.
Mhm.
You're just going to be running as fast as you can just to keep up with yourself, and you're going to fall flat in your face, and you're going to burn out because you can't move fast enough to catch up to where they all already are. And if you are the person who is on the other end of that and you're working with a bunch of raw beginners and you've already written 2 million words of your own, and you basically start getting really impatient and crabby with people because you've already been there, you've already done that, you already made all of those mistakes, and you really, when you see someone doing that for the fifth time, you kind of snap.
We've heard that before about writers groups that you have to find the right one.
Yeah,
Um,
you gotta vet a writers group like you vet a potential dating partner. You know, if you're going to share that level of intimacy with
You
somebody.
also got to be willing to listen to some kind of critical words about your own work at some point. No writing group is going to be your mom and your cousin and your grandma. And if they are and they're patting you on the back and saying, "That's lovely, dear," it's completely useless to you as a writer.
right,
Absolutely.
right.
Uh, the
Um,
spaceman welcomes podcasting feedback, by the way.
that's true.
That's true.
Anybody out there who has, who has any feedback, good or bad, for us, just let us know.
Yes, tell us what we're doing. Tell us what we're doing wrong.
You actually reach a point in your own writing which, when I say that you can't judge your own writing, what you can do is you figure out that something is not right. You get to a certain point where your instinct is that, well, this scene is too condensed. I need to open it up and write half a chapter on this, or this half a chapter needs to be a scene. It's one of those things that you have to have written 2 millions of bad words before that particular piece of good writing is going to stand out at you as something that you can make better. When my husband was my first editor, he would trust me enough to read my work, and he would draw a long red line along the side of a paragraph and just write fix.
uh,
Uh,
that is trust. That is trust.
well, if you could go back in time, just, turn back the hands of time, is there anything that you would do differently?
I don't know that I could. I would still be me. I would still be writing. I would still be reading. I would still be drowning in words at everywhere I looked.
Okay. Okay. Alma, we ask one thing of a lot of authors to give our listeners and viewers an elevator pitch for their next book. Sometimes people can't do it because they're under an NDA. So in those cases, we ask for their most recent book. Could you give our listeners an elevator pitch for one of your books?
Well, the thing that I just finished, the little novella leg thing that I just finished, so an elevator pitch for that, if you like, is the Four Quarters of the Wind, because it's basically four stories that are each tied to a wind, like south wind, north wind, east wind, and west wind, and all of them are. Every story is prefaced by a little, if you like, biographical sketch of the wind in question, and then the story will follow that. I don't know where that came from. It blew in with the wind. it it's kind of weird because one of the stories I started writing for one of the winds, and I began to write the story, and the story was fine, but it just wasn't the right story. So I had to put that aside and wait for the right story to come back into, to fit with that particular niche in the manuscript.
So the concept was, and forgive me if I don't get this quite right, but the concept was that each of the 4 winds was a character, basically?
No, not necessarily. With the first, what I would really like, for example, there'd be a squib on the south wind, and the south wind would be described as what it was and what it did, and how it worked, and then the story that followed was attached to that kind of concept.
Okay, okay. That sounds intriguing.
It does.
Oh, um, well, uh, so we're getting to the point where we're gonna have to start wrapping up, but this is a fun question that we've started asking writers in particular. If you couldn't write, and I know you said this is in your bones, but if you couldn't write, is there some other career that you would choose?
I will refer you to an interview that I heard or read somewhere that was done with the great Ursula Le Guin a long time ago. And she was asked, "What would you be if you weren't a writer?" And her succinct one-word answer was single word: dead. It kind of covers a lot of ground.
It
Yeah.
does. It does.
That's okay. One of our guests said that they would be a ninja. So, you know.
Ninja is a proud and honorable ancient tradition. So,
It certainly is. Can I just say that I would like to be a cat?
oh yeah, yeah. Our cat has got it good. She's over here napping on the floor while we're talking.
Yeah, she is. She is. She's just taking it easy. Um, well, okay. Tell us where people can find out more about you and your books and your works, because you also write poetry and you've done travelogues because you've been so many places. So where can people find out about you and all of these various
Well, the
works?
piece is my website, which is at almaalexander.org, not .com, because that got stolen by a Chinese dog food company at one point. Uh, don't ask; it just happened weird. But it's almaalexander.org. That's where I am on the web. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Facebook. I am no longer on the thing that used to be Twitter. I kind of dropped that a while ago. And I also have a Patreon, which is always open to new people. I would love, my cats would welcome your participation there, because that's what pays for their kibble.
Well, we'll make sure that we follow you on Blue Sky.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And we will definitely make sure that we get that in
In
our
the
show
show
notes
notes.
so that we can, so that we can get people to follow you and
And
check out
just
everything that you do.
just to kind of cotton on to the website
Sure.
thing, the whole thing is, just to explain this, maybe the Duchess of Fantasy persona. The title is real, if defunct. My ancestors actually had a dukedom in medieval Balkans, and I'm the last lineal descendant, so I'm the Duchess. So there.
We know the aristocracy now.
Touch us.
That's right. That's right.
Wow.
The full story of this is on my website. So
wow.
I'll have to beg for an appointment to the court.
Huh?
All right. Alma, that is great. And we'll make sure we get all that in the show notes. So tell us what is next for Alma.
Well, I kind of started writing this new historical fantasy thing. What I've done, my earlier historical fantasies are kind of alternate history that happens in the same alternate world, but geographically in the same, like for example, the China and Greece exist in our world. Well, there is a version of those things in the other world, and so all of these things are standalone novels, but they connect in that kind of alternate geographical historical setting. I'm doing another one of those in a completely different historical and geographical setting, and I'm actually going back to that medieval Balkan area, which is my own history and my own background. And I actually wrote about 20,000 plus words of that book before life happened, and I kind of dropped it to do other things. I had a lot of caregiving to do over the last couple of 5 years or so. The silent years that the voices were silent, but now that the writing whispers are back, I'm going back to that book and hopefully building on the 20,000 plus words that are already there. And hopefully there's going to be another novel by the end of the year with a bit of luck.
Hopefully it'll be the strong foundation that the story needs.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. We wish you every success with that.
We do.
For
we
sure.
do.
And now, are you planning on actually writing your memoirs? Because I think that it would be absolutely fascinating.
I've done it at least twice.
Have you? Oh, okay. Okay. Color me red. I didn't know. I'm sorry.
I wrote a book called Houses in Africa, which kind of covers my African childhood, which was a couple of years ago. And then I wrote another book, which is a sort of grief memoir about my husband and his passing, which was forever shorter than it used to be.
Mm. Well, I would encourage everybody out there to go check those out because I'm sure they're both very fascinating.
And the most recent one, which is kind of sort of a memoir, it's called The Alchemy of Word, which is essentially a guided tour through my house and my bookshelves and what's on them and how what's on them has built what I am and what I write and what have you. So that's also a kind of memoir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It has been a real pleasure getting to know you. And your personal story as well as your creative journey has just been nothing short of fantastical. And we thank you so much for sharing with us. And it's been a wonderful experience to have you.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed myself.
All right. And we want to thank all our listeners for tuning in today. And we hope that you've enjoyed and become inspired by today's guest, Alma Alexander. I want to give everyone out there a huge thank you once again for joining us. And this is the Spaceman for the Halfling and the Spaceman podcast. Over and out.